We're live. Thank you for joining us. I had a little delay getting started tonight, but thank you for joining us on Facebook and YouTube and you guys that are here in person. Let's get our Bibles ready for our continuation of studying Romans. And this is kind of a bird's eye view approach to the book of Romans. We're doing the big ideas that are in Romans, okay? And we're in chapter 9. That's page 1004. Romans chapter 9. So we've been looking through each of these chapters, and I'm going to have to get to the point where I'm starting to consolidate some chapters to make it to end at the quarter. And I haven't found a chapter yet that I think needs to be combined with another, because they're all kind of standalone chapters so far. But I think we'll get to some in the chapters 12 through 16. You may remember me saying this at the beginning of our look at Romans. Romans is kind of divided up into two parts. The first part is what I call theological. The theological section is basically chapters 1 through 11. So we're getting to the end of this theological stuff, where some problems are being addressed, and the problems are perception issues, okay? And so we'll get into that a little bit tonight. As a matter of fact, tonight's big idea is you're not the only one that matters. Let's say that together. You're not the only one that matters. Now, look at your neighbor and say that. You're not the only one that matters. Now, Warren, this is the only time you'll ever get permission to say that to your wife, because the preacher asked you to do it, okay? You'll never get to say it again, right? You're not the only one that matters. Because when you get home, those of you who have your spouse with you, you need to tell them, you are the only one that matters, okay? You need to say that to save your marriage. So my wife's here. You're the only one that matters. Yeah, okay. But for the class, collectively speaking, in the brotherhood, you're not the only one that matters. So I want to start off tonight with what complaints or gripes have you ever heard about church? But don't personalize. Don't give personal examples, especially if it involves me, okay? So what complaints have you heard about church? Either people going or the reason why they don't go. The reason why they don't go. Church is full of hypocrites. That's probably the number one answer if we were playing Family Feud. Excuses people make for not going to church. That would be the top answer. How many of you have responded to people who've said that the church is full of hypocrites? I mean, have you had a comeback, a good comeback? Because I'm looking for one. I need a good comeback when I hear that, you know. Anybody? How would you respond if somebody says to you, when you say, why haven't you been at church? Or why don't you come to church? Why don't you go to church? And I know I'm using that in an accommodative sense, because the church is the people, it's not the building, okay? I understand that, but in the way that it's used today, when you're getting people's trying to garner interest in coming to worship with you, that's what we'll typically say, why don't you go to church? And they say back, well, the church is just full of hypocrites. How would you respond to that? Yeah, there's a reason why they're there, right? Anybody else? How would you respond to that? Oh, it's a good thought. Yeah, it's why we're in church. What would you think they would say, or how would they react if you said, well, I'm probably one of the biggest hypocrites there. I still would love to have you come, you know? I guess in a way, you'd be seen as strange maybe, but you know, you're admitting to them that, hey, I'm human. And, or you could say something facetious like, that's what somebody said the other day when they were mentioning your name. I don't know if I'd advise that or not. We're to be bridge builders, not bridge burners. Yes, Ray? Yeah, I do think that's true. How many of you, and Ray I know is hinting to this too, how many of you believe that's a cop-out answer? It's a smokescreen, isn't it? It's not really the reason they're not coming. It really isn't. If it is, it's rare that if it is. Now, I do think that's a number one thing people can hop on board and complain about. And it's easy to hide behind it so that you can say, I feel like I've rationalized this out as to why I don't need to be there because of that. Well, are you afraid it's going to rub off on you? Is that why? Or are you saying that you're better than them? I wonder what people would say when you have that kind of feedback. Are you saying you're better than them? I'm not advising that in the course of discussion. I do think this, when we're engaging discussion with Christians or non-Christians, either way, there are things that you have to use discretion with. An answer that I might give you wouldn't be the answer I might give you. You know what I mean? I've heard people, for example, tell me that if it were not for brother so-and-so who told me if I didn't get my life right and straighten up and get in church and read the Bible and obey the gospel, that I was going to hell. And it worked for him. But telling a person that they're going to hell may not work. And I don't advise it. You've got to really have a good sense of discretion. Some people need to be told the hellfires are hot. And some people need to be told grace is amazing and God is welcoming. What might motivate someone won't motivate the other. It might drive them away. So you have to really be careful with that. And I think there's probably a gift to that too, of knowing how to deal with people. But I do think that that's overgeneralizing, hence to, you're painting with a broad stroke, a broad brush there. It's generalization. And if you have a comeback at all, you might think of somebody that they like at church. You don't think so-and-so's a hypocrite, do you? And of course they'll say, well, no, but you said everybody there's a hypocrite or whatever, or a lot of hypocrites there or whatever. What would be another one? Another excuse, another complaint, another gripe. I'm surprised nobody's saying that. Oh, yeah, the exclusive language. You guys are the only ones going to heaven, or everybody else is going to hell. Again, bridge building or bridge burning? What is that language? It's bridge burning, isn't it? I have never known that to be very evangelistic at all, to use exclusive language like that. And I know we have a lot of people that can remember the generations that was a popularized sentiment. But you go back maybe 2 or 3 other generations back, and not really, you don't have to go, I keep thinking, I'm getting older now. I do have to go back further to this. But I would say pre-19, I hate to say that. Okay, I was born in the 60s. I'm going to say the sentiment was alive and well by the time I understood anything about church people, and I would probably guess it goes as far back as 1950-ish. But if you go back further than that, or for example, how many of you have heard of a preacher in our brotherhood named N.B. Hardeman? N.B. Hardeman. And what he was famous for was the Hardeman Tabernacle sermons that were preached in a long series of sermons at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, Tennessee. How many of you have heard of the Hardeman Tabernacle sermons? If you've been to Oklahoma Christian, there's a display for N.B. Hardeman that Lynn McMillan helped put together, and some others, curators for that. In the Ryman Auditorium, he would pack the house night after night preaching New Testament Christianity. I'm told, I've not seen a picture of this. I would love it if I'd ever found a picture of this. But I was told that above him, a banner was displayed that says, Christians only, not the only Christians. And, that is our plea. The restoration plea has been to unite Christians, not divide, but to unite. But the way to do that through restoration leaders came to the same consensus: is you've got to strip away the man-made stuff, the names, the creeds, the rituals, the catechisms, the practices, the traditions that are not from New Testament. And that's the only way it can be achieved. And I agree with that. And I still make that plea today. You know it better as this: speak where and be silent where, which is not a verse, by the way. Somebody asked me one day, well, where's that verse? Well, there's not a verse, but that was a motto. It was the mode of operation for which we determine what's there or not. Okay, I kind of went off on a tangent there. Another gripe or complaint. I'm surprised nobody says the sermons are too long. You haven't brought that one up yet. Or a preacher's too boring. Okay. Anybody else? Huh? I haven't. I had. Well, we're streaming. I can't do that. I knew of somebody. I feel like Paul here in 2 Corinthians. I knew a person, whether I was in the body or out of the body. I knew it speaks of the third person, right? He was speaking of himself. I know of a person that specifically told me they would never go back to church again because all they want is your money. Has anybody else heard that before? That's one thing I really like about our heritage in Churches of Christ, and I think it was most spotlighted with Mac Lyon's program, In Search of the Lord's Way, and it was often mentioned that we don't ask for money. Our work is fully supported and funded by Churches of Christ in your area. And I like that because a lot of preachers on TV are saying what? Get your wallet out. We'll have the sermon on the amount here. Come on. And if you do, it's a sign of your faith, and we'll give you something in exchange for your gift, you know. I'll send you more sermon tapes or whatever it was. There's incentivizing there going on, but gimme, gimme, gimme was the message, and still is, I suppose. It's been a while since I tuned into TBN, but you do hear that a lot. Jimmy, one of our elders, we're kind of hesitant, aren't we, as the elders and as a minister, on doing a lot of preaching on giving. We just don't do a lot. I mean, if it is, it's very instructional, but it's not a lot of persuasive, give more, give more, give more, except for Mission Sunday, when we do focus. And I guess all month of October, we do talk about the importance of supporting missions. But, I mean, it's worth it. And by the way, if you haven't seen, we're close to 31,000 now. So we're getting closer to the goal. There's still time to make. Here I am making a speech on money. Give. Come on, get your I would do like one preacher said, why don't you reach into the pocket of your neighbor in front of you and give like you always wanted to? You know, do that. But yeah, we do have some time, and usually God provides, you know. Amen. God provides. And Paul says, my God will supply all your needs. Again, I'm getting off on a tangent. Let's get back to Romans 9. We're going to read this. You're not the only one that matters. The reason why I want to start with the gripes is all these gripes we've just heard, it's too many hypocrites. It's always asking for money. What was the other one? Okay, go ahead. Add one. Say it again. Okay, so I don't go there because so-and-so thinks he runs the church, or that's the general right. And yes, that's probably among the top 3, top 5 answers, along with the hypocrite one and the money one. I think all those are top 10 at least. What was the other one? The money, the hypocrite. Was there another one? Oh yeah, the exclusiveness. Okay. All those are all about you. Think about it. I don't want to go there because they're always asking for money. What's that about? It's about you. There's too many hypocrites there. What's that about? You. You think you're the only ones going to heaven. What's that about? You. And I guess you could say the one that runs the church, that's why I don't want to go there. Yeah, it's kind of about him, or it could be a her, I guess. But it is about you. Do you see that? No? I mean, if you use that excuse, you're not going to go there because you feel like somebody's running a church. That really is about you. See, Ray, go ahead. I saw your hand. That is and I'm going to say that's one that I could almost validate from a standpoint of some people are uncomfortable being around others, and it's a part of their makeup. I still think maybe a lot of people would use that as a smokescreen, but if there's anyone that might be validated, there are people that have anxiety attacks when they're around other people. And I'm not so sure we've got a good answer for that one. I mean, do you agree with that? So, but I do think it can be used as a smokescreen too. But all these, for the most part, it's all about you. And that's the big idea from Romans 9. There's a pew there. The Romans 9 is, it's not all about you. Chapter 9, verse 1. I speak the truth in Christ. I am not lying. Why would an apostle have to say that? Apostle Paul's always having to defend himself, isn't he? He says, my conscience confirms it through the Holy Spirit. I have great sorrow and unceasing anguish in my heart. For I could wish that I myself were cursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my people, those of my own race, the people of Israel. Theirs is the adoption to sonship. Theirs the divine glory, the covenants, the receiving of the law, the temple worship, and the promises. Theirs are the patriarchs, and from them is traced the human ancestry of the Messiah, who is God over all, forever praised. Amen. I'll stop there because that's where my publication stops and puts another heading. So the heading I have here is Paul's anguish over Israel. What do you pick up from Paul that he's saying there? What's the big message there if you were to just put it in a nutshell? What is Paul saying? Let me hone in on something here that I think, first of all, he is a Jew. And if you read chapter 10, verse 1, he'll say, my heart's desire and prayer to God for the Israelites is that they may be saved. There is no doubt Paul had a very endearing, caring level of compassion for his fellow Jews. Would you agree? And that has never changed. That was the way Paul was from beginning before Christianity to the end. When he's a persecutor of Christians, he's endearing to the Jews. He's thinking he's doing God a favor by protecting Judaism. He prides himself on how Judaistic he is. As far as zeal, a Pharisee, a Hebrew of the Hebrews, he would say. If you're to say there's bragging rights at all, and he says, now I'm not asking for bragging rights, but if anybody could have them, it'd be me. Doesn't he say that in a place? And even in Christianity, now that he's a convert, he could still toot his own horn if he wanted to, and we'd probably affirm it. Who wrote more books of the New Testament? Paul. Going on all the missionary journeys, a lot of the focus of Acts is on Paul, right? We would say, and I would highly put, I would have no hesitation at all to put Paul on a pedestal, to be honest with you. And maybe you think this would be arrogant of him to say it, but I don't think he is arrogant in saying this. But in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1, he says this, be followers of me, as I am a follower of Christ. Now, if he were to only say, be followers of me, watch out, right? But is it bad to think of yourself as being followed or to set yourself up as a leader to have followers? No. Not if you're not the top rung, but Christ is. Does that make sense? And if he qualifies that statement by be followers of me as I am a follower of Christ, okay? And he'll tell, like in the book of Ephesians and Colossians, and they're kind of like sister books, a lot of the same subjects. It's almost like the same template he used to write those letters. He'll say things like, servants, be subject to your masters, but he'll qualify it as you be working for the Lord, not for men. You know, he'd say things like that. It qualifies under the heading of Christ being the supreme head, of course. So he thinks of himself as one to be followed, and we are called to set an example. Be an example. He says that to Timothy, the young guy that he's mentoring to be this minister placed in Ephesus. Don't let anybody look down on you because you're young, but be an example to the other believers. What's that mean? Setting an example to be looked at, modeled after, and followed, right? But you need to understand his humility. As far as sinners was concerned, he said, I'm chief. As far as apostles is concerned, I'm the least, right? Called out of season. I'm the least. When we look at Paul then, as he's sharing his heart about how he feels, there's no doubt in my mind is a special place for his fellow Jews. And here's what we learn from that first portion, and we'll read the second portion here in just a second, and we'll come back and discuss anything y'all might want to and ask questions. But in this first little section, he is even willing, I don't know if you caught this or not, he is willing to be lost, if that would mean his fellow Jews could be saved. Is that pretty radical? It's pretty radical, isn't it? Does it sound like anybody else you know? I'm willing to be lost or to lose for the sake of somebody else gaining or winning. Who does that sound like? It sounds like Christ. And it sounds like what Christ taught. He who will be first will be, he who's last will be. How do you save your life according to Christ? Lose it. You lose it. And if you try to save your life, you lose it. But if you lose your life, you'll save it. But what Paul's doing is saying, I'm willing to do this for others, which is what Jesus did. I'm willing to even be lost, eternally lost. I think there's no other way to cut that. When he says this, verse 3, let's read that one again. For I could wish that I myself were cursed. Is that a good word? No. And cut off from Christ. What can that mean other than eternally condemned, lost? What else could it mean? I can't think of anything else. I can't think of anything worse, can you? I would rather myself be lost from Christ, and Christ is the only hope of salvation, but I'm willing to give it up if, for the sake of my people, my own race, the people of Israel, could be saved. So if you were to say, now, Paul, what's the take-home value of this? And if we know the big idea is, if our big idea is it's not all about you, he's certainly not being hypocritical here, is he? He's not saying that and then trying to save his life. He's actually willing to practice what he'd be preaching. I'm willing to be cut off for you, my fellow Jews. To me, this really digs down deep into how intense and gives a sense of urgency of how desperate, and I use that term because I really do believe he is desperate that his Jews could be saved. And I'm wondering at times if my level of interest in the lost being saved even comes close to his level of an awareness of the loss. I made a statement a couple of Sundays ago when Mike Napier was scheduled to be here, but was, unfortunately for us, not able to. We missed out on that. But do you remember me making a statement that very few people have stood in this very spot and preached the word that has had the amount of concern for the lost being saved as Mike Napier? And if you've heard him preach, Gail, am I right? When you hear him preach, and every year on Missions Month, we'll have him with us for one of those Sundays. And it really grabs my heartstrings. It really does. I guarantee you this. I'm glad you mentioned that. If you start talking to him, you can start off on any secular topic you choose. It could be farming. It could be weather. Those are the two main topics around here, right? Farming and weather. It'll get to a conversation about the gospel with Mike. He will steer it that way. I really do believe that. He lives and breathes preaching the good news. And it's an example to me as a preacher to see somebody like Mike. I hope he's watching tonight. Hi, Mike. I don't know if he is, but it's an example to me to aspire to be more like him, because I really want to be like that. Heard a speaker one time, Tex Williams, and some of you probably have heard of Tex Williams. He played an important role on the World Bible School, the World Bible School program, correspondence courses. Many churches of Christ for years and still active today would correspond with students over Bible lessons. And he was a keynote speaker at a Tulsa workshop, and I heard him speak on a topic, and you've heard me mention this several times, but his topic that was assigned to him was go ahead and die. And the reason that was the topic is because he said there's a lot of people when we approach them about, would you be a soul winner? Would you study the Bible with somebody? Some people would respond, well, I'd just rather die than do that. Well, his statement was, well, then go ahead and die. But he tells this story. He and his wife were at a location where they were preaching. He says they were eating in the home right before the meeting started, in the home of this other husband and wife that were having a discussion. He says they were so obsessed about winning souls that while we were sitting there eating, we happened to look out the bay window, and somebody not across the street, but walking down the sidewalk in front of their house was walking by that they had not recognized before, and determined, hey, they must be new to our area. And the husband said to the wife, I wonder what size baptismal garment they wear. You know, thinking ahead like that, that's how they always were thinking. And I think Mike is that way. And I really admire that. Paul, in his statement in 1 Corinthians 9, willing to become all things to all men, so that by all means, what's he leaving out? Isn't that all-encompassing? All men, all means, everything possible, in other words, pulling out all the stops to get even just some to be saved. To win as many souls as possible is what he says in 1 Corinthians 9. And that's Paul. It's not all about you. And Paul says it's definitely not all about me. But it is all about you. I want you to go to heaven. I know there's not a single person here, I'm hoping, that there's not a single person here that has anybody they can think of that you would say, I hope they don't make it to heaven. I hope that's the case, okay? I would think everybody here tonight would say, everybody you know, you'd like to see in heaven. Is that a fair statement? Is that true, you think? I hope it is. I want to see everybody I know, ever met before in my life and ever will meet, go to heaven. And when you go up to somebody, shake the hands of somebody, and you're meeting somebody for the first time, and it's maybe a lady at the convenience store where you stop to get gas, or it's a guy down the street, or somebody at the coffee shop, I'd like for us to all kind of think of, I wish they could go to heaven, and maybe what could I say or do to maybe help steer a conversation about that, to be thinking on our toes all the time. I'm going to, without his permission, but Jim, in law enforcement, you see, I know Grant County is full of criminals, isn't it? I mean, there's got to be a lot of bad people over there. There is over here in Kay County as well, and we try to send them your way. But, I mean, I'm sure this is a thought you have, though, that people that you see that are not going in the right direction, that you'd like to see one day, I wish you'd make right decisions and straighten up, that you'd want to see them in heaven one day. Would that be a fair statement? Yeah. I mean, that's really what we're all should be interested in. I hope I didn't put you on the spot or embarrass you, but watch your speed going through Medford. Let's read the second part, and then we'll come back and pick up any pieces. Verse 6, it is not as though God's word had failed, for not all who are descended from Israel are Israel. Ooh. I don't know if you're hearing what he's saying or not. Let me paraphrase it in the way that would connect the way that you and I would be hearing that if you were the target audience. We're not the target audience. Jews are in this passage. But let's say if we were, not everybody going to church is a Christian. And he might even go as far as to say, not everybody that was raised in the church is going to heaven. Because, first of all, is that a true statement? Is it a true statement that not everybody that was raised in a church is going to heaven? That's a true statement. You need to know that. It is. And I'm going to pick up a loose end I forgot to a moment ago. Is there a problem with exclusive language? Is there a problem with hypocrisy in the church? Is there a problem with maybe the way we might talk about money or somebody running a church? Yeah, those problems do exist. That's real. That's very real. It's not made a problem. I'm just saying they're used as smoke screens most of the time. But you're not the only one that matters. And so now, after saying, I'm so in love with Jews, and this is what I'd be willing to do for any Jew. But then he says, but not all Jews are Jews. He's kind of saying not everybody from Israel is Israel. Not true. We've already seen a chapter where the big idea was it's not what's on the outside that counts, it's what's on the inside. And Jesus demonstrated that when he's speaking of the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, when he says they're washing the bowls and cups on the outside, but inside are filthy. And he says, first what? Wash the inside. Get that right first. Not just the appearances. What's inside matters more. I feel like I'm always preaching, and this ought to be a Bible class. I'm sorry. Verse 7, nor because they are his descendants are they all Abraham's children. Ooh. I like saying ooh. Okay. Biologically, yes, Abraham's bloodline, but not playing the role of Abraham's descendancy as is planned in the promise. Yeah, they can point to, well, we have Abraham as our father. And I love how Jesus approached that one. God can turn these stones into sons of Abraham if that's all it was about, Again, it's speaking of their hypocrisy among the Jews. It says, on the contrary, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. And that's interesting because he takes it away from Abraham to say the promise is actually repeated, or at least the promise is the descendants of Abraham, yes, but it's through Isaac's bloodline, and that promise through the Abrahamic covenant is not through Ishmael. Now, that's not mentioned, but that's what's being referred to here. That was through Hagar, right? It's not through Ishmael. That's what Abraham thought he was going to do, help God out with this promise. I mean, he did say through my seed, but maybe he didn't mean Sarah, so here's Hagar. I'm going to help God along with his plan. I'm going to kind of help push it along. How many of you have done that with God's plans in your life before and you utterly failed? I think I'm going to help this out a little. And you created more problems than you did help, right? Or is it just me? Abraham, he's told by God when he sees what's happening, God says, no. It is through Sarah, who's at the time of the promise, what was she, 90? Now I'm forgetting the ages of Abraham and Sarah. When Isaac's born, isn't she 90 and he's 100? Is that right? Okay, I'll take your word for it because I'm confused on it now. I've had so many numbers. We've been talking about finances all day long, so I've just got numbers coming through my brain. I'm just got a big old headache. Okay, verse 8. In other words, it is not the children of physical descent who are God's children, but it is the children of the promise who are regarded as Abraham's offspring. In other words, being a Jew is not an ironclad guarantee that you're in stamp of approval thing. It's not. And then he says, and based on the fact that that's not what it's based on, but it's based on the fact of the promise that's made, opens the door for a new possibility of how you can be Abraham's descendant when you're not biologically related to Abraham. Did everybody follow that? That was very wordy. So he's going to say more about this in more detail in chapter 11 when he talks about grafting in the branches in a tree and some branches were cut off. We'll get to that later. But verse 9, for this was how the promise was stated. And this is a quote. It is from Genesis 18, 10, and 14. At the appointed time I will return, and Sarah will have a son. So don't just go around saying, well, we have Abraham as our father. So what? So did Ishmaelites. But they weren't part of the promise. So don't keep claiming Abraham as a specific individual as if you're to worship Abraham, which I think somewhat they were creating a worship of a human being. And Abraham was just an instrument, and it wasn't within the instrument itself, it was in the promise. And here's how that can correlate to something that maybe we can also relate to in the New Testament. When Jesus says, who do people say that I am, to his disciples, in Matthew chapter 16, some say you're Elijah, some say John the Baptist or Jeremiah, one of the prophets. Who do you say I am? And I think he's looking at Peter at that point because he's going to dialogue with Peter, but I really think he's addressing all the apostles there, okay? Who do you say I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven revealed this to you. Good for you. Yes, that's the right answer. And then he says, and upon this rock I will build my church. But there were some people that thought the rock was Peter. And I don't think that the audience of Jesus would have thought that. And here's why. Because the word for Peter and rock, although similar, are very different. Peter's name was Petros, little pebble. But what Jesus said is, on this rock, Petra, I will build my church. In the Greek, you can see the distinguishing difference. That sounds redundant. You can see the difference. It's always hard to talk in front of an English teacher that you're thinking, did I conjugate my verbs right? Did I do this right? Does she ever spell check you? Yeah. So, I lost my train of thought. Oh, it's not Peter. That's the rock. What's the rock? What's the rock of Matthew 16? That Christ is the Son of the living God. That's the rock. And if you are in doubt about it, think of the passages that say, he is the chief corner, what? Stone. And if you read 1 Corinthians 3, there's no other foundation that's been laid than that which was laid by Christ. That's the rock. It's not Peter. So, again, some people mistook that and think it's all about Peter. I think that's also true in the Jews. Some thought it's all about Abraham. But he moves it away from Abraham and puts it on Sarah. And he moved it from Sarah, too, and put it on Isaac. Okay? You're trying to label yourselves based on an individual, but it was the promise carried through individuals onto this very moment that they were standing in the first century. It's based on the promise that Israel can be Israel. Okay, and I need to get legs and move here because I've only got about 5 more minutes. So let's go to verse 10. Not only that, but Rebekah's children were conceived at the same time by our father Isaac, yet before the twins were born. What were the twins' names? Let's play Bible trivia. Jacob and Esau. Which one was first? Esau. What does Jacob mean? This is the bonus daily double. Supplanter. What did that mean? How were they born? Let me rephrase that. What was unique about how the twins were born? Esau came out and Jacob had a hold of his heel, didn't he? Remember that? So he's called the supplanter. And that was just kind of a teaser for what would later happen in both times the betrayal kind of happened with being in cahoots with mom and having this plan to steal the birthright and then the blessing, okay? But it is through Jacob, and that wouldn't have been normal because Esau being firstborn would what a Jew would normally think is how things are passed through and on in positions of honor, but it was going to be through Jacob. And that's why he's coming back to this, verse 12, not by works, but by him who calls. She was told the older will serve the younger, just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. And I always feel I have to qualify that by saying, don't think that that means the way we would, that's not the connotation of hate that you and I would think of. This is a word that means to love less. One's loved more and one's loved less. That is a comparison word here, okay? It's the same thing with Jesus when he says, if any man be my disciple and does not hate his own life, his wife, his children, yada, 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 he cannot be my disciple. He's not saying, children, hate your parents. He's not saying that. But to love them less than you love the Lord, it's a comparative moment that he's teaching there. Verse 14, what then shall we say? Is God unjust? No, not at all. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy. Is God a sovereign God? What does that mean when we say sovereign? Can God do whatever he wants to do? Yeah. If you have anybody who can't always do what they want to do, they're not sovereign. But God is, okay? Can he save anybody he wants to, anywhere, anytime? You bet he can. Now, we know some traits about God. He doesn't go against himself. He does not lie, okay? That's a part of his nature. And sometimes we put those little hypothetical things. If God could do anything, can he create a rock that's so heavy he can't pick it up? You know, either he can't create the rock so heavy or he can't pick it up. You know, that's not in God's nature to be in such a position like that. He says, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy. I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. It does not therefore depend on human desire or effort. And nobody's going to heaven by the good works they do anyway, right? Because we're saved by grace, not by works. 2 more minutes and I'm done. Verse 17, for Scripture says to Pharaoh, I raised you up for this very purpose, that I might display my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. Now, I know now, those of you who are Bible students probably don't even need me to read much further here to get the idea that he's saying, because does this not allude to the 10 plagues scene of Exodus where he kept hardening and softening the heart of Pharaoh? Don't you get that image in your mind? That God was in charge. Pharaoh might have thought he was, but he wasn't. Makes for an interesting discussion, by the way, whenever you're on the topic of free will. That one and Judas Iscariot, but we'll talk about that later. That's a different series. Okay, it's not this series. God is able to be the one in control and be the determiner and can be the one who he desires to show mercy or not. And therefore, it's not on you. Again, it's not all about you. I think for the sake of time, I'm not going to have a lot of time to be able to get into everything else that I'd love to. I will point out to you that at the very last verse, you've got this stone that causes people to stumble, sometimes referred to as a rock of offense. That this is a problem for Israel, in other words, when you're talking about Jesus, because he strips away all the mentality and mode of operation that a lot of the Jews, if not most Jews, were operating on. It is all about me, how much we do, how much we perform, how much we get things right. Pharisees are making sure everybody else is doing their part just right, policing everybody else, patrolling. And it's not anything about that. Not at all. So, I had one more little application point. See, it's just skipped my mind for a little bit. Let me think if I can bring that back. When I was standing here just 3 seconds ago, I had it on the tip of my tongue. Let's stop here and see if you have any questions or comments. What was I saying 30 seconds ago? Let's see if I can pick it back up. Can anybody rewind the tape and say, here's what you were saying? It may spark that memory again. Well, that's not going to come back anytime soon. Does this get worse as I get older? I was afraid you'd say that. I'm going to think of this in about an hour and a half from now, and I'm going to call each and every one of you to tell you, here's what it was. But I think correlations can be made, even though this is a context and a subject matter that pertained to first century dynamics. We're not dealing with Jews in our church today and the privileged thing that's kind of in their mentality. Oh, got it. Here are some of the things I've heard said. It's like, well, I didn't get much out of that church worship, or I didn't like that song he led, or I didn't like the lesson today. I think we need this or that. And I didn't like, it was too hot in there, or it's too cold, or they always talk. Lanny's always telling the same jokes or same stories. Isn't he getting senile? Don't agree with that. Well, it's not all about you. That was my main point, and I'm going to stop there because that's the point I had, the main point, the big idea. It's not all about you. It has to be about other people and your concern and level of concern for them. All right, we'll stop there, and those of you that were watching, thanks for joining us, and we will see you hopefully Sunday is our Centennial Sunday. We'll have a lot of people here, and please RSVP if you have not done so yet. Go to blackwellcoc.com. Push the button. We need a head count turned in on Friday. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.